Good afternoon, everyone. As you can see, we are a few people left, but I think that, as I was discussing with Paola before, the second part of the course is actually the more applied one. So for those of you who are taking the 6th credit course, I think you will have value added also in terms of topics that are going to be dealt with. What I'm going to do in the 3 lectures that I'm responsible for in the second part is talking about 2 broad issues in the development of innovative services in the fixed telecom environment. The first one has to deal with social networking, and the second one has to deal with voice over IP. Okay, so I will spend today and tomorrow lectures talking about social networking, and next Wednesday I will discuss the voice over IP. And that's something that deals with innovation in the fixed telecom industry. And then Professor Pagani will discuss more innovation in terms of value-added services which have been developed over time in the mobile telecommunications sector. So, the Web 2.0, okay, you probably have heard a lot about this, and you know more or less what it's all about. Web 2.0 has to do with the development of new services that revolve around the development of the internet, and that has 3 main characteristics. There is a bunch of services that allow users to communicate in an interactive way, services that have to do more with the business networking type, and services that are related to the content sharing. Okay? Now, of course, these are 3 functionalities that have been implemented in a series of different services. So, for example, if you think of one possible example of a content sharing website, what would you think of? Who? Twitter. Flickr, okay. What about business networking? Do you have anything in mind? LinkedIn. Interactive communication. Okay, YouTube, which might also be seen as a content sharing website, or what I was mentioning before, Twitter might be a form of interactive communication. Any website whereby you have chat systems across different types of users might be as a form of interactive communication. These 3 functionalities characterize what we can call social networking sites. Okay? Now, what do you think of if I tell you social networking sites or websites?
I think they're great. To me, it's the best way to look for information in a way.
Okay.
Because you can say, if you're looking for maybe not a specific subject, but you want to say about telecommunications, you know, you can find like telecommunication guru's profile on a social network, and it's going to give you the most inside information that you probably never find yourself.
Okay. So look for information, interaction of any kind. You were thinking of people profiles or information that you can find over the website. What are the most common social networking sites that you're aware of? Facebook. Okay. What else? What? MySpace. Orkut. How many of you know Orkut? Okay, we'll come back to Orkut. What else? Well, you mentioned another one before, talking about business networking. LinkedIn is allegedly a social networking website, a very peculiar case, and we will investigate the business model behind LinkedIn tomorrow. What else? Others? Who? Sideword, a small word, very interesting example. Yeah. Okay. Have you ever heard of QQ or double Q? Yeah. Of course. That's the biggest social network in the world. Okay. It's not Facebook. We'll come back to this. It's a social network that has been developed in China, and it's basically it's not really exclusive for Chinese people, but the idea is that it gathers people from China. 300 million users of QQ, so we're talking about very big numbers, much more than Facebook. We'll come back also to a small word example, because that's a very interesting case of a social networking site, which did not really aim in its first place to attract the largest possible audience. Okay, so if you think of Facebook, if you think of other type of social networking site, well, the aim in the end is to build up very large communities of users. Okay, a small world, by definition almost, is a very peculiar social networking site, because you cannot really register on it unless someone else invites you. And in order for a person to invite someone else, that person needs to have a high number of contacts. Okay? Are you in small world or not? Okay, so you know. Okay, so you've been invited, you have never entered. It's a relatively small community. So we will also think about what are the advantages and disadvantages of having different sides of social networking sites. This small survey that I've made is just to tell you that it's not all about Facebook, it's not all about LinkedIn. YouTube is not a social networking site, although it is probably the most popular Web 2.0 service. Okay, so let's try to understand what are actually social networking sites, how users can exploit those sites, how companies can make money on those sites. So we will try to tackle these different issues. Now, at a very, very general level, social networking websites are websites that allow users to create online profiles or personal web pages and develop online social networks. Social networking sites are very different from blogs. Okay? The main difference being the interactivity that you can have on social networking site and the functionality of social networking site. Okay? Everyone can more or less easily develop a web page, develop a blog, just write tons of pages, but having a social networking site in place and making money out of the social networking site is a very different issue. Okay? So we're not talking about blogs, we're not talking about personal web page, we're talking about a specific service. So users usually build up a public or a semi-public profile on the social networking site and add a series of information on that specific site. They might design, in some cases, not in all cases, the appearance, if you want, of the web page. And in general, they can add different types of contents, photos, videos, information, music files, or any other kind of specific content. Okay? Now, probably all of you are on Facebook, I guess. So you've built up a profile. I guess it's a public profile or semi-public profile. You've probably added information, contents, and so on. What about the design of the personal page? You cannot really do that much on Facebook. Okay? So the design is somehow predefined, and of course you can add information, but the whole setting up of Facebook is something that is exogenous to the users. Okay? And it's something that is very different, from example, from MySpace, where users have more opportunities to design their own specific page. Okay? Why is that? What's behind this strategy, you think? Because this is clearly a firm strategy that lies behind both Facebook and MySpace.
What I like about the fact that with Facebook you can't really design a profile is that if you could, then a lot of people would design their profile, spend time on it, and you kind of feel guilty, like, oh, he's got a better profile, you know.
Okay, so you do.
It's just effortless, you know.
Okay, so.
There's no rules, you just don't care about it.
Okay, so it's effortless. You do not have, let's say, competitive pressure, peer-to-peer competitive pressure. On the downside,
Kids prefer MySpace.
It's commoditized, so it's standard.
it's commoditized, it's standard, so I cannot really add that much value. Okay, so for example, if I work in a creative industry, Facebook is not probably the website where I can most of all making advertisement of my company or of my profile. I mean, I cannot really do that much with that, okay? MySpace is a different issue, and what makes MySpace very different from Facebook is the platform underlying the website, okay? Because MySpace is based upon an open source type of concept by which users can kind of easily modify, add application to their profiles in order to make them more appealing, okay? And that was a specific interest of MySpace users. With Facebook and with other social networking sites, such as LinkedIn, for example, or other websites, this is not really possible. So the idea is not to really have users including value on that, but to have as many users as possible. Okay? Now, the basic functionality of all these sites is to create a network. Okay? So to display the connections of the users, which very often are friends, but sometimes are simply people who users might want to know through a social networking sites, either because they're interested in that person, maybe because that person is famous, or for any other reason. I want to contact a telecom guru via Facebook. I can contact him or her and try to get in touch in order to look for information. Okay? So the idea is that my network of connections is displayed in most social networking sites as a list of friends. So as soon as I enter a specific social networking site, I have friends that are connecting with me and to whom I'm connecting. Remember when we discussed about the network effect issues, okay? So we've seen that the willingness to pay in presence of network effects increases even if the price stays stable, and this is a way of reaching a critical mass of users even without any specific firm strategy behind it, okay? This type of services are the typical services that are characterized by network effects. And these are good news for companies, at least. Okay? So in principle, companies could really exploit the profitability of these sites because of the existence of network effects. Okay? The benefits for the users lie very much in the connection side and in the fact that they can increase the number of friends or the number of acquaintances, they can look for information, they can interact more easily with people. Okay? It's not that much about money for the users. It's much about money for the company. Okay, we'll come back to this. This is really a great opportunity. And it's a great opportunity not only because you can market your product or services, it's a great opportunity because you can create business relations via Facebook or via any other kind of social networking. Social networking sites allow users to make their social network visible to other people. Okay? This is a big issue because very often people complain about this. People complain about the privacy setting, for example, of social networking sites. People complain about the fact that even if you log out of a social networking site, the information that you've given to that specific company stays within the company. Okay? So once Facebook, for example, has understood that Paula is friend with Elisa, with Carmen, or with other people, that piece of information is retained by Facebook, even if she is logging out. Okay? So the display of a public profile or semi-public profile means that I make my connections visible, okay? Which is not always desirable. I mean, it depends very much on the type of profile that I set up. Now, it's not only about making my social connections visible, but it is also about increasing the number of connections, okay? So at the very beginning especially, social networking sites were designed with the specific purposes of allowing people to meet each other, okay? So not of allowing friends that already existed in the network to be connected online, but allowing people to meet each other, okay? Then slowly, the idea of the old social networking sites went from this, so from the meeting type of idea, to increasing the connections within a social network that already exists, okay? Which means that at the very beginning, the idea was, let's go from local network effects to global network effects, okay? We are friends offline, we go online, we can increase our connections because, for example, my friends can become friend of a friend of mine, okay? However, even if they were born with this idea in mind, very often the result is that they simply mirror the existing networks, okay? So if I'd ask you how many people of your Facebook friends you do not actually know, you've never met, what is the percentage? 0? For everyone? Okay, so I mean, this is a big thing. It might not be 0. Maybe you might become a friend of a person that you haven't met, but, for example, I don't know, a famous person you might want to get in touch with or something, okay? But still, I mean, the idea is that the social networking sites connections mirror the existing networks of friends, okay? So why we need that? If this is the case, so if social networking sites in the end mirrors the existing connection, why we need social networking sites at all?
Sometimes they simply facilitate sharing of information, like sharing pictures.
Okay. So, well, I would respond to this that Flickr would be probably enough.
Yeah, but at the same time interacting with the content, commenting, liking, disliking somebody else's pictures, and yeah, and this is the first thing. And the other thing would be being constantly in contact, even though if, for example, the person is on her exchange semester somewhere else.
Okay.
You're in touch with your friends via constantly exchanging information.
Okay. So there is a value which lies in the interactivity and, again, in the content sharing, which wouldn't be otherwise existing without this type of websites. You want to say something? No? Okay. So think of all the social networking sites that you're aware of, okay? Facebook, LinkedIn, a small word, Orkut, Q, just to make some example, Hi-Fi, there are tons of different websites. There is really a great variation in terms of visibility and access, okay? In terms of technological features, as I was mentioning before, Facebook, in terms of the underlying technology, is very different from MySpace, and it is very, very different from LinkedIn, for example. And of course, in terms of user base, okay? Nobody but Sumitra knows Orkut, okay? Why is that? It is very popular both in Brazil and India, okay? The user base is geographically very localized. So you might want to exploit the global nature of the web. In the end, you have a website which exploits the local community of users. Yes, Bart?
Remember Google a while ago had a plan called Open Social or something, that they wanted you to have one profile which would go to all the social networks.
Yeah.
I don't hear about it anymore.
They didn't really succeed. Why don't you think they succeed? Why do you think they don't succeed?
The profiles that you design for specific networks are different, depending on what are your friends in the network, what's the purpose of the network.
Okay.
Also probably companies didn't want to share, you know.
Okay.
Google appeared to
Okay, that's because it was a Google proposal and would get too much power. Barbara said a very interesting thing. You build up profiles in different websites that are different, okay? So, I mean, you're always, what's her surname? Biela, Barbara Biela. But if you're logged into LinkedIn or to Facebook, the people you interact with are very different, probably. The reason why you logged into LinkedIn in the first place are very different from the reason why you logged into Facebook or into any other more entertainment type of social networking, okay? Content sharing on the one hand, posting a job profile on the other hand, okay? And this is why we see the coexistence of a number of different social networking sites, even in presence of network effects. Because remember that the bottom line of having network effects at the global level is that in the end, all the users would converge to a specific product or to a specific service just because everyone else has done that, okay? And because there is a value of all the persons being connected to the same service, okay? This is a very interesting topic here because the idea is that even in presence of network effects, what we observe are different communities of users that within the local environment of Facebook, LinkedIn, Orkut can benefit from network effect, okay? So again, it is not really true that with network effects we have just one website or one specific service emerging, okay? But the services are different in terms of access, in terms of user base, in terms of features, so that the network effects are not as strong as to overcome any other feature. For example, the language, for example, the specific functionalities of each social networking site. Okay, timeline. Well, this is a timeline up to 2007. Of course, there are many other social networking sites that were developed. The very first attempts to build up social networking sites happened in 2000 with Friends United, but the big hit was Friendster. Okay?
Why is names database not there?
Why?
Names database.
Name?
Names database. I'm sorry, I don't know if it's not popular, but
No.
something called names database which came to
Oh, names database. Yeah. But that's not really a social networking site.
that is the first step, I think, in this direction.
Okay, but still, I mean, the idea of having a public, I know very few things about names database, but the idea of having your profile connected with your friends, it's not exactly the same thing, okay? It was more a very rough idea of connecting names around, if you want, okay? But yeah, that could be seen as a if you want, social networking site. LinkedIn, MySpace. MySpace was another very important case. Then 2004, the first Facebook room started emerging just within a specific university. And then Facebook for Everyone, Bebo, which was a very important social networking site. Orkut is somewhere here, Sagazon, and then other. Okay? History. Now, the very first launch of social networking sites was in 1997, okay? With a social networking site which was called 6degrees.com. Why 6degrees.com? Does anyone of you know anything about the 6 degrees of separation? Yes?
Everyone is connected to each other by 6 degrees of separation.
Say it in a better way. Everyone is connected to each other.
Bounces. I know every person.
Exactly. So, of course, we are connected by 1 degree. Okay, so we all know each other. But maximum, we can be connected to anyone else in the world by 6 degrees. Okay? Even to the Pope or Obama or someone else. If you think about it, okay, then we'll see an example of this, but that's true. Okay? The origins of this idea of 6 degrees of separation came from a study which involved people in the US trying to understand how long it would take to send a mail, so a snail mail, to people around the world without knowing them. just passing it to people they knew. Okay? And the average was 6 degrees. So the idea is that you can really reach people around the world, even if you don't know them, and this is an important thing, by 6 degrees. 6 degrees was a very basic website for social networking. Of course, it entailed profile creation, friends listing, and surfing across different friends lists. The website was not really successful, and that was mostly because of technological shortcoming. So it didn't have really functionality. The technological platform upon which it was built was really poor, so it just didn't succeed. But the idea was there. Okay? Between 1997 and 2001, there was a series of community tools supporting different combination of profiles and publicly articulated friends. Okay? Now, again, the concept of friends at the very beginning was not really like the concept of friends we have in the offline market. Okay? So the idea was building up connections. Yes? It comes from all those kind of programs with the possibly addition of the idea of having more functionality to your profile and being able to share content across different type of users, which you do it really in a poor way if you use Messenger or any other kind of chat. Of course, you can have a conference, but that's not really the same thing. Okay? But the idea comes exactly from there. Okay? Although that particular type of tools are actually based on the existing networks of friends. Okay? Again, big difference with these ones. Here the idea was, let's try to enlarge our networks. Let's try to involve more people in our set of connections. 2001, Rise.com emerged. You probably haven't heard about this social networking site. And then LinkedIn and Friendster. Rise.com is an interesting social networking site because it was the first attempt to exploit the business networking side of the market. Okay? So more or less like LinkedIn, this site was born to exploit the connections within the San Francisco business and technological community, which at that time was particularly active and particularly beneficial also in terms of networking. Okay? So Rise.com, if you want, is an antecedent site to LinkedIn, especially to LinkedIn. Still, this particular social networking site was a niche tool. So it was designed for a specific market. It was designed for a local community, local also in geographical terms, and it never got to reach the big markets outside California, outside the San Francisco area. Okay? The first big success in social networking site is Friendster. Okay? It is the first big success, and it became over time also the first big failure. Now, the idea of Friendster was to be a social complement to Rise. Okay? So Rise.com was devoted to the business community. The idea came from there, and people started thinking, well, why don't we develop a community of friends that can be connected not just for business purposes, but for any kind of entertainment purposes. So the idea is, let's build up a site that complements Rise.com. Okay? So the setting in which this particular social networking site emerged was very similar, but with very different purposes. It was developed in 2002, and the main aim of this particular site was to compete with the dating sites. Okay, so like, well, Mythic was developed later on, but the idea was, let's try to make people know each other. Okay, very different thing from Rise.com, although the idea, the underlying idea was the same. Okay, Rise.com was developed in order for people who were working in the same industry to do business network, to know each other. This was just moved into the consumer side. Okay, and it was designed to help friends of friends meet. So I have my friends, Paula has her own friends. Our friends can see each other and can meet and whatever, possibly date. Okay, so this was the main aim. At the very beginning, it was built as a niche tool. This is something that characterizes almost all social networking, even Facebook. Okay? Initially, Facebook was designed for a very specific community. And then, because of network effect, it's just diffused in the world. And then it started diffusing, not really through advertising, but more through a word-of-mouth process. So for this particular social networking site, local network effects, if you want, were in place. Okay? Remember this, remember the niche approach, remember the fact that this particular website was developed to compete with some websites which were already quite successful, which were the dating sites, that were not really social networking in their nature, okay, but had this idea that they could be successful. Now, why it failed as rapidly as it succeeded in the first place? For two main reasons. And we will find these reasons also behind other failures, for example, behind the sort of diffusion of MySpace in the recent year. The first is technical reasons. Okay? There were lots of problems with servers and databases that were not designed to handle large number of information. So again, remember that Friendster was built following the rise.com model, so the community was supposed to be small. Okay? And in terms of power, in terms of capacity, servers and databases were not really designed in order to handle a large number of information. The second most important reason for which this particular social networking site failed is because the main idea behind it, which was let's make people meet, was restricted because you couldn't really see all the people in the network, but you could see just people that were far away from you by less than 5 degrees. Okay? So the idea is that I could go to my friend's friends and to my friend's friend's friends and so on and so forth, but I couldn't really see all the user's friends. Okay? This is fine if you think, if you think of a site that mirrors the existing networks. Okay? So it's fine if people, the idea is that we go on Facebook and I want just my friends to see my profile and so on and so forth. But if your aim is to compete with the dating sites, if your aim is to have the networks becoming bigger and bigger, then restricting the possibility of users to interact with each other might not be the best strategic option. Barbara? Okay. So the idea is, yes, I agree that most of websites that we can think of, especially business networking websites, are designed with this idea in mind. So you cannot really see all my network of friends unless, of course, I allow you to do so. But the idea is that we can exploit network effects on a very local basis. Fine. But if your aim, like it was in rise.com, is to make people who do not know each other meet, then you do not really need to have this. And actually, this created distrust, mistrust of users towards these particular websites. Okay? It was 2002, so people were already aware of the possibilities of the Web 2.0. People were already aware of the value of sharing content, but still it proved to be particularly difficult to diffuse these social networking sites because of technological and social features. This is the early history. Then social networking sites became particularly popular, and surely the most popular websites started emerging around 2003. Okay? Most of these websites are profile-centric. So the idea is that I build up a profile, okay, and I exploit all my connections in order to enlarge the network. But, of course, there are instances of professional sites, LinkedIn, which is not really profile-centric in the sense that what I care is not very much about my friends of friends connections or about anything else. I care about company looking at my CV online and, for example, asking me for an interview and so on. Okay? There are lots of websites that are social networking sites, but were not born with this idea of meeting people in mind. For example, Care2, couch surfing, which has become more and more popular over time. You know couch surfing? Yes, Barbara doesn't know that. If you want to travel in a country and you don't know where to stay and you don't want to spend money, you can ask a person, do you have a couch, literally, where I can sleep in? And you just exchange, basically, favors. Media sharing sites, Flickr, Last.fm. Flickr is not really a social networking site in the sense that it doesn't have the aim and the functionality of the most advanced social networking sites, but in principle, you can add content, you can comment, so you can provide feedback, you can create your own profile. It's very much developed around the picture, around the video thing, but still, I mean, we might think of Flickr as a social networking site. Very interesting case, Last.fm, which actually now is not for free anymore. Does anyone of you know what Last.fm is? No one? Yes, what is it?
You can create your own radio station, you can listen to the station, and as long as you log on to the website and have 30 songs for free to listen, and then you can do like listening to other people's radio.
Yeah, and yeah, and where is the social part of that?
You can comment on the albums, the singers, and everything. You can also introduce the YouTube onto the website.
Yeah, you can even exchange playlists, let's say, with other users. You can make other users know songs that they might like, but they don't know, and so on and so forth, okay? The interesting thing about Last.fm is that it was really for free originally. All these websites, almost all of them are for free. You just need to register. But soon it became a pay website, okay? So now you have a trial for free, but if you want to create your own base station, radio station, and share it with other people, you have to pay, okay? Not very much, but still. It's something that didn't work very much. Yes?
Just a comment about paid social networking. I often ask myself the question, how much would I actually be willing to pay for Facebook? You know?
Yeah, and what's your answer?
I think I'd be able to pay like 10 euros a month. That's no problem.
Well, that's a lot. Okay, you shouldn't tell the companies that. Yes?
But that kind of a question, I think we can ask it twice. Once before you join and once you are a member. You have two different values.
Yes, why is that?
Later you maybe could value it more because you are connected and you like the convenience.
Okay,
You cannot afford to lose those members now and you're hooked on to it.
okay.
Before that you would think that why would I pay some money just to meet friends who I already know.
Yes. To comment on this, I totally agree, and part of the reason for what you're saying is that social networking sites are experience goods from an economic point of view, which means that you can attribute a value and therefore you can define your willingness to pay only after you've actually joined the service, you've actually exploited the social networking. Okay? So the idea is that I do not really know how much I would pay for Facebook or for LinkedIn or for a small word before getting into the website. Well, I can ask people, but I never really get a precise picture, especially if I think of my own needs. Once I'm in the service, then I realize that it's of a high value, okay? Social networking sites are typically information-intensive goods, and all these goods are experience goods. Very difficult to price, because precisely for what you said, you do not really know what's the value in there, okay? An important point discussing the emergence of social networking sites and the diffusion is that, and we now come to our friends' social networking sites, Orkut, is that some social networking sites were actually born outside the Silicon Valley area. Okay? Now, the Silicon Valley, especially at the beginning, well, end of 90s, beginning of 2000, was, of course, the place where most of electronic startup companies were, and most of even individual entrepreneurs were located. Okay? So lots of the thoughts about social networking side came from that area. This means that everything that was developed outside the Silicon Valley area was not really understood. And this was the case of Orkut, which became a very popular website in India and Brazil, but that's because a Brazilian company started exploiting this particular website design, and MySpace, okay, which was not developed in the Silicon Valley area, but was developed further north, although still in California. Okay? So these two websites were not initially understood in terms of their potential. Okay? MySpace became very popular, Orkut became very popular, but in a geographical limited area, well, kind of limited area, in particular Brazil and India. Okay? So the type of people who were behind the development of social networking site at the beginning were the usual Silicon Valley people, okay? And sometimes they failed really to understand the potential of this site, even if they were all aware of the benefits of network effects. Of course, they were working in the computer industry, so that's where actually network effects work especially. And even if most of them were young, were really active people in that particular sector, okay? They were placing much more value on business networking sites, such as LinkedIn, for example, than on this particular websites. MySpace. Now, how many of you are on MySpace? Is any of you on MySpace? No, so you do not have a profile. Why not? Because there is Facebook out there and you don't need a MySpace profile. Do you know who's exploiting very much MySpace? Especially bands, okay? Independent bands, let's say, that do not have a major behind their development. The development of MySpace built upon the failure of Friendster. So users who did not want to use Friendster anymore because of the social problem of being restricted and because of the technical difficulties related to the service and data set, started supporting this particular platform. Okay? Independent rock band were even expelled from Friendsters because they did not really comply with profile regulation and because, of course, they were interested in having as many friends as possible on the networks. Okay, started investing very much in MySpace. And in the end, MySpace has become really the locus of independent bands as a social networking site. Okay, as soon as Facebook appeared in the market, lots of users started moving from MySpace to Facebook. Okay, so in the end, when you go to MySpace, what you find are video, media content that comes very much from the music, from the independent music industry. It managed to create a symbiotic relationship almost between the bands and the fans, and in this way it's exploited network effect, although again, if you want, located in a particular social community. Okay? The most important aspect of MySpace, and this is one of the reasons why MySpace succeeded, at least at the very beginning, was that, as I was saying before, it was based on an open source approach. Okay? So it allowed a great personalization of web pages by users, and users can really add even HTML functionalities into their formats of their profiles so that they could really personalize their web page. Almost unique in the way in which users can actually develop customized web pages. Okay? So who's really interested in doing so? People who might have also an economic reason for doing that. People who might want to, you know, become famous and want to attract the interest of other people. People who are competing in the same sector. Before Bart was saying, well, I'm quite happy that Facebook does not provide personalization functionality because I do not want to spend time in order to customize my profile more than I usually do. If you had to sell your music, if you have to sell songs or whatever, you might be willing to do so because this is what characterizes you as compared to your competitors. Okay? Very different aims, very different type of users, very different results also in terms of diffusion. Basically, they started from the bands, then 3 different groups of users started using MySpace very much. The first is artists, musicians in particular, teenagers, and post-college urban social crowd, okay? These three groups of users are somehow intertwined with each other so that the network effects occurred in particular because they were exchanging information and content among each other. The main idea behind MySpace, as opposed to other type of websites that were initially developed like Friendster and also like Rise.com, was to expand niche communities. So any social website started from niche communities, but it grew over time by way of network effect. So if I had to single out one reason for the success of MySpace, for sure, of Facebook, of other companies, even Orkut, is because they started in a niche market, but suddenly recognized that the niche market would have not been the most successful way in order to address the population, okay? However, remember that not all social network sites were born with this idea in mind, okay? And actually, lots of them started really as means of communications, okay? So started from the idea of messenger, if you want, of any kind of chat website among specific group of users. So college students for Facebook, Harvard college students in particular, geographically located businesses for Rise.com, bands for MySpace, okay? And gradually they expanded to include the entire population. Now Facebook became an extremely successful case. What do you think lies behind the success of Facebook? Since you're all using that, okay, so you're actually practical witnesses of the success of this platform. What's different from MySpace? Well, besides Bart mentioned the personalization possibilities. What else? User-friendliness, in which sense?
Like I joined Facebook in 2006.
Yeah?
Back then it was, you had your profile page, and you didn't have the newsfeed with your friends. You could only visit other friends' profiles. You could use the wall.
Okay.
First, what I really liked was the wall.
Okay.
It was kind of like text message, but in virtual reality. You know?
Yeah.
You could easily stay in contact with someone. And I think later on the photos, you know, the tagging photos,
Okay.
photos, that's too,
Okay.
a little Latinized.
Okay. Smidra?
I used to use only Orkut before,
Yeah.
and I switched to Facebook later.
Okay.
Orkut and Facebook were similar in every aspect, except Facebook has the feeds option, where you type in what your current status is.
Yeah.
The Orkut has a scrapbook, here you have the wall. We also have communities there. Everything is same. The reason I switched was because of the geographic thing, because I knew people outside India were not around.
Okay.
That was the only reason I switched.
So as soon as you...
I was the victim later on, but I don't know what actually was the thing that made it so successful.
Okay. So you do not believe that Facebook's success, for example, was driven by the tons of applications that are on Facebook, I don't know, little games, tests, whatever kind of. I'm just asking. What do you think of that? Because now the trend is clearly to develop more and more value-added, so-called value-added application, that social networking sites. While Bart was saying, well, what I liked is that it was simple. I have my profile. I had the wall, which it was actually not really an innovation in itself, because other websites had it, but it made it very user-friendly in a way, much more than MySpace. But that was because everyone has exactly the same structure. Okay? Which, by the way, is changing very often, and this is a negative byproduct of the fact that it's very standardized. Okay? So once Facebook decides that the design is old or is not good anymore, then they change it, and everyone has to comply with the new regulation, if you want. Okay, the group functionality was actually an important feature. The event, creating events functionality was also a very important feature, beside the niche idea of MySpace.
I
Yeah.
tend to use Facebook more nowadays.
Yeah.
send a message to the page,
We'll see some numbers exactly on this issue. So on the fact that the importance of these social networking sites can be evaluated not only in the sheer number of users, but also in terms of the content that is shared through Facebook as opposed to other means of communications, for example, email or any kind of messenger forms. But I'll come back to this in a minute. However, remember that some networks, okay, like a small world, for example, choose to remain restricted to a very small group of users, to a very small audience, okay? Either because they actually aim at selecting people, so a small world is designed in such a way that a small number of users at a time is entering the website, or because they target very specific users, in particular, users that are geographically located in a particular area. Okay? Now, if you're located in India, in Brazil, in China, yes, the audience is small, but of course, in absolute terms, it's still a very big success. If you're located in a small country in Africa, chances that you become successful are, of course, very small. So relative numbers matter, but of course, the absolute numbers can somehow compensate for the fact that you have just a group of Indian people using that. But we are talking about millions and millions of people. Not only geography matters, but of course, you have lots of interest-specific social networking sites. Okay? Couchsurfing is one example, so people who like traveling a lot, there are social networking sites discussing almost any issue. Okay? What we are interested in here is, of course, in the social networking sites that manage to become somehow successful at the global level, or at least manage to have a high number of users across different countries. Now, this shows you the percentage in terms of growth of millions of unique visitors between June 2007 and June 2008. Then I will show you some later statistics, although we do not have the growth for 2009. Top 3 growing regions in percentage: Middle East, Africa, well, broad region, of course, Europe, Latin America. In absolute numbers, Europe, Asia, Pacific, and Latin America. Okay? Between 2007 and 2008, the top 3 social networking sites in terms of growth were Facebook, Hi-Fi. No one mentioned Hi-Fi. Okay? Hi-Fi is also a social networking site that started in a way in a niche community and then was developed, especially in the United States. So it remained in a way confined to the North America, well, United States and Canada, but it's still very popular. And Friendster. Okay? So between 2007 and 2008, still Friendster grew very much. In absolute numbers, again, we have more or less the same. This is the growth of social networking by region, okay? And again, you see Middle East, Africa, Asia Pacific, Europe, Latin America, and North America. There is a catching up process going on clearly, okay? Most websites were born here, and this is why the percentage of growth in North America is not as high as in other countries, but for the rest of the world, we can actually take some information from this. And besides the top 3, this is the percentage of other social networking sites in terms of growth. Look at MySpace, look at Orkut, which has been doing pretty good, Bebo, Skyrock Network, and then again Facebook, whoops, Hi-Fi, and Friendster. Okay? What's happening now? These are the top social networking sites by June 2009 in selected country. Okay? First, second, third. Australia, Canada, China, France, Germany, Italy, Russia, Spain, UK, and United States. Okay? What can you observe from this? Paula is shaking her head. Tell me something about, tell me your thoughts.
I was looking to Italy, Badu. It makes me laugh.
Okay. But do you know Badu or just because?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know it.
Okay. Sumitra, you want to say something?
No, I just know this live journal in Russia. So I was thinking about blogs.
It's all?
I was thinking about blogs. Where do blogs come from?
Okay. What about Russia? What about China? What do you observe there? Okay, they did not use Facebook, not only that, but they have very powerful local networks, okay? This is a similarity between China and Russia. So the top website in China, QQ, okay, has a very high number of users. Then there are other two social networking sites, very local in terms of audience. But again, if we think of China or if we think of Russia, being local means that you're already quite successful, okay? Facebook, of course, is playing the biggest role. MySpace is still quite big. So yes, it's going down, but it's still very important. Twitter is catching up very much in the United States, although the issue with Twitter is that Twitter was born more with the idea of exploiting the wall functionality that was embedded in Facebook, which means going a little bit backwards to the idea of having a system for users to interact with each other without adding too much value on that. Yes?
There's a really good website called trendwatch.com.
Mm-hmm.
They send you reports on what's hot on the web.
Yeah.
And the recent one, they highlighted the hottest new search engines now in America
Yeah.
are Twitter search engines.
Okay.
And like I completely don't understand this.
I can explain this.
You think it?
I can explain why that is so.
Go ahead.
We've done a project on this.
Yeah?
It was on creating live news.
Yes.
As in, someone can, if someone witnesses an event, he can immediately update it on his Twitter as, oh, I witnessed this rock show and it was great.
Yeah.
And if you had to read that in a newspaper or something later, it will come one day later. But this is happening live. Or if someone buys a product in a supermarket and says, oh, I used this product and it was very bad. So the marketers themselves can zero on the person who's used it and ask him why was it bad.
Okay.
So this is not possible in any other platform. This
Yeah.
micro live type of thing.
Well, it would be possible. I mean, this is a very interesting explanation of this in response to Bart. It would be possible using mobile application, I think, especially using the so-called geo-located mobile applications, okay, in a way to get feedback and immediate updating of the different news or of different, I don't know, products and service revision by users, okay? But surely Twitter, I mean, has of course the scale and was built precisely with that particular aim. I'm not totally, I mean, I'm also a little bit skeptical on the potentiality, on the future, if you want, of such applications once, for example, Google starts entering seriously into the market, okay? Because in terms of search engines, they're still quite ahead of the others. But I think they had an interesting idea within a context where Facebook was playing a major role in any kind. Still, Facebook doesn't have, at least doesn't look like having enormous potential in the business networking area, okay? So, for example, when Barbara was mentioning the idea of, I don't know, being in touch with a famous person or someone who can provide information or something, well, that's true, but from that to build up business networks, I think that there still is much to do. And LinkedIn, in this respect, is more powerful. But of course, you need to be selective in the way in which you design the specific website. Fused Brazil and India, this is Orkut. Russia has its own local website as much as China. But if you look at the big picture, of course, most of Africa doesn't have access to social networking sites. That's not a surprise. If you look at the big picture, the power of Facebook is quite striking. Okay? So still, I mean, there remain some areas in which there are other networks that are important, but looking at the really graphical picture tells you something about Facebook. This is, again, to give you some news. This is a very interesting and recent phenomenon, which is the diffusion of mobile social networking. Okay? So these are percentages of users of mobile phones who use a number of applications. So watching video, listen to music, access news and information, SMS, purchase ringtones, access social networking sites. The percentages are not very high, okay? We're talking about 3% of German users, 5% Spain, France, Italy, 9% in the UK, but the change is relevant. So mobile networks are becoming potential platform for social networking usage. And in this respect, I think that social networking that do not provide an incredible value added, but that have the idea of providing an update of news and a very quick messaging system across users, such as Twitter, for example, could really exploit this platform very much, as opposed to other type of social networking sites where the value added stems from content sharing, media content sharing, video, audio files, and other type of application. This is the percentage of mobile social networking users who exclusively use social media. This is the year-to-year percentage of a change in social networking via browser application. And this is the figure that we've seen before. So mobile social networking users as percent of all mobile phone users. So there is a trend in this respect. Again, mobile platform could become as competitive as fixed platform in the diffusion of social networking. The difference might be in the type of social networking that might diffuse. And chances are pretty good that companies start developing specific social networking websites that are targeting mobile users as opposed to fixed platforms. Okay? Let's come to what Bart was suggesting before. Because as we said, if you want to evaluate the value of a social network, imagine that you want to invest in a social network or you want to advertise your products on a social network. Okay? You might decide that the social network with the highest number of users is your perfect target. Okay? I want to attract as many users as possible, so I just advertise my products on Facebook, and that's it. Okay? But it's very important also to see the type of content that is sharing. Okay? What are the users doing on the social networking? Just writing on each other's walls? Okay? Or just, you know, feeding the news with information on their own life or whatever? Are they doing something more? Are they actually sharing content? Are they substituting social networking sites with the email, for example? So the popularity of social networking can be evaluated also by looking at which sites are seeing the most content share of them. Content in terms of any kind of media, file or any kind of information that you might think of. Documents, exchanging files of any kind. Okay? By July 2009, Facebook not only dominates the world in terms of number of users, but it dominates also in terms of content sharings. Okay? With 24% of shares from the widget consisting of users posting items to the social network. This is probably not very surprising. What is really surprising is that Facebook beats out email and Twitter. Okay, Twitter, again, is a different story, but it's really impressive that users have started using Facebook much more than email to share contents. Okay? The decline of email, of course, is not extremely surprising. Okay? Considering that there are more people having access and using social networking much more than people using the email. Okay? After all, email is a tool which depends very much on the working context of different users. Now you have Facebook, why you would need an email account, for example. Okay? So this is a very interesting trend that is happening. And of course, this at the very global level signals out that Facebook is an important competitor, also in terms of sharing content, but it's not the only one. Whoops. If we look at the content sharing to social networking sites, this is Facebook, this is the email, this is Twitter, and then we have a series of domains that relates to Yahoo. Okay? Now, if we take all the Yahoo functionalities like Yahoo Buzz, Yahoo Messenger, and Yahoo Bookmarks, which is also a very important tool, together, then Yahoo comes second after Facebook. Okay? And remember that, again, Yahoo was born not as a social networking site. The aim and the objectives of this company were completely different. But taking together all Yahoo properties, okay, it accounts for 14.4% of sharing. MySpace, but you're, you're staring at this graph. You're surprised? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very surprised at Yahoo. I never knew there was such a big player in content sharing. I thought it was a company that's in complete decline.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really in decline. I mean, it has interesting features. It's just took some time from, let's say, moving from its own core business, which was basically a search engine company, towards developing value-added content. One application which is really, really powerful on Yahoo is Yahoo Answers tools. I don't know if you know that. It's not really a social networking way of managing information, but still it has some value to the users. Okay? Well, MySpace, of course, has fallen down, not very surprising. Dig, Bebo, and LinkedIn, also LinkedIn, it's quite low in terms of content sharing. This is also very interesting because LinkedIn is one of the few social networking sites who's making real money. It's actually the most profitable social networking site right now. But that's not because it's leveraging upon the content that is shared between users, but because it's leveraging upon a very specific business model, which is making companies paying to access users' profiles in order to find people that can work for them. Okay? So LinkedIn is really an interesting case in this respect, because it really has something more than other websites in terms of functionalities and in terms of specific aims. Okay? So, this as far as numbers are concerned. Facebook is playing a big role. Yahoo is surprisingly catching up in terms of social networking functionality. LinkedIn is very low in terms of content sharing, but is particularly powerful if we think of the benefits that companies and users can have, and therefore it can charge money. Okay? What are the most important socioeconomic issues? So what are the most interesting issues from a social perspective and from an economic perspective that are attached to social networking? The first is the whole concept of impression management and friendship performance, self-presentation, if you want, and friendship performance. In the sense that when you publicly display the connections you have, okay, the numbers of friends, this somehow is an identity signal for web users. Okay? There are people who are competing on the number of friends they have. Okay? I saw it myself happening. This somehow signals the identity of the user. Okay? Users like to have lots of friends because they think that they are very popular. This is quite important also from a social perspective. If you look at the number of users of different Facebook users, for example, you can see also differences in terms of, there has been some studies on this in terms of income, in terms of ethnic groups, especially in the US. Okay, so it's quite interesting to understand how users are actually exploiting these particular social networks. The important thing, and this is something that we haven't discussed very much so far, is that the identities, of course, might be fake. So I might easily set up a profile, not only on Facebook, but on other different websites that is fake. Okay? Why I would like to do this? Probably I wouldn't do that on MySpace, since that's a website that allows me to advertise my products or services, not on LinkedIn, because that's where I might look for a job, okay? But why I would want to build up a fake identity on a website, for example? This is a quite common phenomenon, maybe not only on Facebook, maybe not properly on Facebook, but
Sometimes it could be for fun, or sometimes it could be to con people as well.
to?
Con people.
Okay.
Also, if you work in a, say, lifestyle-driven industry, where you need to, you're kind of the face of your product.
Okay.
Another thing is, I was working in FMCG company for a while, Procter and Gamble, and once we had a funny idea to check whether on some Polish social networking site, are there any profiles of the products? And we looked in and we discovered that there are profiles of the washing detergents that people created. It was not even our idea to promote it, but they had several friends, and it was really funny to see
Okay.
what people do.
Okay, so you can use actually the website as a marketing tool. You say, well, the product is fake, it doesn't really exist. Yes, but still, you know, you get people start looking for products, information, services, or whatever. There are privacy issues. So the whole idea behind social networks is to increase the number of connections, of course. But if we think of websites that are more related to content sharing than to social networking in itself, like YouTube, for example, almost all identities are fake. Okay? So I'm just posting out video. I do not really care of having my name and surname on there. Flickr is, well, a little bit different, but still also has this idea of it's not really necessary to create the true identity, but I just want to share content. Okay, to share something that I think it's important, it's interesting, it's valuable in a way.
It's interesting what YouTube did. They did a change. They didn't really tell people about it. But if you have your Gmail account and you're browsing YouTube, like your Gmail account transmits to YouTube, you know?
Okay.
So if you say, oh, I like this video, I'll add it to my favorites, it stores it for you.
Yeah.
And recently, I saw that it's no longer an account I have with YouTube, it's actually a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So they like make your account channels that everyone can see, and they didn't really tell you about it, you know?
Yeah. Oh, of course, they are also using the cookies, for example, that are in your website so that they can record the historical, from an historical point of view, the videos that you've posted or that you've watched or your favorites or whatever. The fact that they are linking with the Gmail account is not, of course, by chance, but because they're strictly connected with the Google website. Yes?
Yeah, I think they try to do it with all their products because it's happened that if you had a Gmail account, you would get an Outlook account as well. You would also get a Picasa account for image sharing.
Yeah.
So that's part of that strategy. But
Well,
there's one account across all.
it's actually part of the whole network effect creation idea. Okay, so I try to leverage upon the network, not just in relation to a specific social networking site, but in relation to a bunch of social networking sites that I think users might use at the same time because they provide benefits and other things. Impression management is one of the reasons given by Friendster users for choosing particular friends, for example. Okay, and a very interesting trend, well, it used to be especially that MySpace spammers exploit people's desire to get in touch to interesting people to find targets for their spam. Okay? So we could think it in a positive way if we think of companies that want to market their products. Okay? So I see that, for example, Barbara is keeping on asking friendship of telecom gurus. So I think that she might be interested in specific products or services that have to do with the telecom industry. That's, let's say, a good way for companies to make money. But of course, this has a big issue of spamming as well. So I can do exactly the same if I think of the spamming people or companies who are exploiting information on users. Okay? So whenever you think of your networks of users, remember that it's all information that you give out to a social networking sites and to companies that are investing in them. Okay? So they can really trace the profile of your friends, of your network of friends, and see all the connections, see the structure of the network, for example. There was an application a while ago which was quite popular on Facebook, then it almost disappeared, that was showing really graphically the networks of your friends and how many people you had in common with other friends, so actually how clustered, okay, your network was. And that's a very important information for companies, okay, because if they have to advertise the product, and Paula and I have a very similar network of friends, they can save money by just advertising it to one person instead of two persons and so on and so forth, okay? And I'm serving as a viral marketing tool also to the networks of friends of Paula. So the idea of having impression management and friendship performance as two most important issues on this social networking site is a very important thing. Digital identity versus real identity. Let's come back to this issue, because of course everything that we said on the information that people release on social networking sites have to do with the identity issue. Now, if the identity is fake, okay, it means that there is no Barbara Biela that is actually asking friendship to the telecom guru, okay? And the idea is that I might market products to people that I really do not know. So there is a big amount of information that is exchanged over the social networking sites, formal, informal data, real or fantasized. It depends very much on the sites that we are considering. There is a problem of fragmentation in the sense that, as she was mentioning before, my identity can be very different across different social networking sites, okay? In a way, from a social perspective, it's broken up in several websites, in several networks, okay? So some pieces of information on my profile are on Facebook, other pieces of information are on LinkedIn, other pieces of information are on MySpace, and so on and so forth, okay? Is this good? Well, it depends very much. From a company perspective, this may not be really good news, because I would like to have as many information as possible on the users in order to understand what kind of profile that users compiles with and what kind of products or services he or she might be interested in, okay? From my perspective, the idea is that I can exploit the functionality of different services by setting different profiles. So there might be a sense of doing that. Of course, there is this whole issue of fantasy, so I can have fake digital identities. And an important issue is that if you have an old profile and you don't use Facebook or you don't use a social networking site anymore, that is not removed. So it stays there, okay, and you just simply do not care about that. But of course, it occupies space. It's a piece of information that it's in the network, and it's something that, in a way, it's a waste for someone who wants to exploit the network of users, okay? Imagine that you send around, I don't know, it often happens that students send around surveys because they need to write their thesis, so they send surveys to all their Facebook friends, okay? If half of the people have an old profile and they do not reply anymore, then maybe using Facebook is not the best way. Okay, so it's a matter not only for companies, but it's a matter also for the personal users. Okay, the idea of temporality of identity. Identity might not evolve over time. You might not constantly updating your profile, your status, giving feeds or whatever. Okay, not everyone accesses Facebook every day. Not everyone provides information on Facebook, provides value. Okay, and this goes back to the idea that if we think of a network and if we think of network effect, it's not only true that the add up of a person provides value to the others. Okay? If a person signed on Facebook just because, you know, some friends told him or her to sign there, but he doesn't share content, she doesn't, I don't know, post anything on the wall, what's the value just to have one more user in the network? Okay, but he or she doesn't provide value to the others. Yes?
Facebook wants us to make people who are inactive more active by inviting you to reconnect with the person who's in the network, but you don't really interact with them.
Exactly. This is one way of trying to avoid the temporality or the short timing of the personality. Of course, Facebook does all sorts of marketing strategies in order to increase the number of connections. They suggest people you might know, and so on and so forth. But this idea of reconnecting has to do precisely with this. Okay, so trying to revamp somehow the profiles that are not used anymore, but that might prove useful to the network. Of course, the way users manage their identity and the functionalities that are available on the website and the characteristics of the websites are closely linked. So if we think of the management of identity on different websites, okay, we need to think closely about the relationship between this and the whole issue of the privacy. Okay? This is the last thing we see for today. Privacy is one of the most important issues when we consider websites in general, social networking in particular. Why is that? Because in social networking websites, very often, you might get in touch with people or with content posted with people that are not your friends, that are not within your connections. Okay? So, for example, if someone tags Paola in a picture and I'm her friend, I can see all the photo album of that person. This is a big bug in Facebook.
You can only see the photo album
In which she is there, yeah, but even if the pictures... Yes, but even if the pictures do not include her, okay? I just need one picture out of 100. Okay, so I have Paola as a friend of mine on Facebook, for example. I see that picture and I can see the entire album.
But it's an idea of extended social networking, you know? If she's in that group of friends, I know her, then...
Yeah?
The borders on engagement privacy.
It is border. I mean, there has been lots of complaints on this because it actually violates the privacy, okay? I'm having my own picture album that I want to share only with my friends. By tagging her, or if someone else tags her, or she tags herself, okay, my pictures become available in a way to everyone, okay, at least all her friends, which might be an issue. Okay, I'm not saying that, of course, they probably did it on purpose because, again, the idea is to enlarge the network. But the privacy issue, in particular in these websites where you share lots of content, is an important policy concern. Okay? So the diffusion of information within profiles allows accessing sensitive data on users. Okay? Social security numbers in the US, for example. Okay? You can access pretty much everything you want. Okay? Is this correct? Is this good? Well, it depends very much. After all, we've seen that very often social networking sites mirror the existing networks. Okay? So I'm happy to share the content or my information with my friends, but I'm not really aware of the privacy settings that are set within my Facebook profile. And it's a paradox because you really very often are not aware of how much public is the nature of the internet and of the social networking sites themselves. Okay? So very often what happens is that some social networking sites or some pages, for example, are banned. It happened also very recently in Italy, for example. And you basically have information on whatever you want. Okay? So either you set a very high level of privacy, which requires some technical skills, okay, or requires you to spend time on that, and you don't want to do that because, you know, you have a user-friendly website, you do not care very much about setting all the privacy levels, okay? You think that just your friends can access your profile, and suddenly very targeting advertising start appearing, you know, on the side of your profile, for example. That's because companies are using information that in principle you've reserved to your friends. And this might be an issue, okay? But it's not just this issue. The issue is also that friends, or if you know, people in the same network can have very different concepts of privacy. So even within a local community, okay, the concept of privacy setting might be very different. So I might think that being friend or being connected to someone allows me to browse his own or her own web page, to share the information on that particular profile with my friends, but this might be very different according to specific cultural, if you want, needs or cultural features. Okay? So we stop here for now, and tomorrow we will get more into the managerial implication and into the characteristics of the social networking structure in order to understand how companies can actually make money on that, and the different characteristics of the users.